Hi, I'm Pam McClung. I'm here today to present my oral portion of my paper for religion class for Professor Quasnos. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I chose for my topic the life events of King David. So my paper has the cover page and then the introduction for David, the body of my paper, the conclusion, and then the science page. I also have my presentation board, which I've included my outline. And then I wanted to have all of the, the journal articles that I chose to help prove in my paper. So I was able to find through the library a lot of journal articles that related to the stories that I brought out in my paper. So where I started, I wanted to look at the history of the times that David was anointed, that he was anointed king. What was that history like during that time? What was going on with the lineage, how his lineage to Jesus was, why was that important, and why was the lineage why why was it important to have the lineage of Jesus written in the Bible? We know that Jesus wasn't perceived as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords by the Jews during that time. Um, and how is David connected to that, and how is that important to us during this time of our life? So I brought that out in my paper, and so then I wanted to also to look at David and his relationship with Saul. Why is that important? Because David spent 10 years of his life fleeing from Saul. But yet, Saul, when David was in, Saul was, excuse me, I'm sorry. Saul comes on the scene as the king over Israel. This was right after the time of the judges, and Israel did not have a king. And the prophet Israel had came to the prophet Samuel and had asked for a king. And Samuel was reluctant to give Israel a king. He knew that with having a king, that was going to have some problems. But he sought the Lord, and he said to anoint Saul. So Saul was the king of Israel, and he had disobeyed commands of the Lord, and the Spirit of the Lord had left him. So then Samuel was sent to Jesse's home, David's father, and he anointed David as king. But Saul still served as king for many years, and David served up under him and loved him, and Saul loved David. But then David arose in power. Saul became jealous. David had to flee for his life for 10 years. And then after Saul uh, died in battle, then David becomes king. And I follow his life. I don't follow as closely a lot of those events in my paper, but I do follow I pull out the story of Goliath. That's very important. And it's very, I, I bring out the story, especially about the armor, because I can pull that into our New Testament and how we have, the Bible tells us that we can put on the armor of God and the breastplate of righteousness and, the feet shod for the gospel. And I just think that is so neat how that all can be pulled together. There's just many things, types and shadows in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and the stories that we find with David and all through his stories and the life events. I also cover Bathsheba. That was an amazing story. And I also bring out the point of how much sin is in David's life. You know, Saul, the Spirit of God, left Saul because of his disobedience. But what about David? What made the difference in David? David sinned just as much as Saul did. But what made the difference? And the difference was that David had a repentant heart, that he loved God and he sought God. You know, even when he sinned, he knew where to go, and I think that's important that we know where to go when we sin, because we're all going to sin and fall short of the glory of God, and that's what David did. So I brought that out, and I did try to go back and look at history and put a lot of history in there. There's a great example. I had never knew about the champions in the Bible, going back to the story of Goliath. During that time, uh, I didn't even realize that with Goliath, that he was the champion, that really that he was the only one that was meant to fight that battle, and that he was just waiting for the another champion on Israel's side to fight against him. And of course, we know that became David, even though nobody expect, David was never meant to fight, But I brought that out. That was very interesting, and I try to link that to modern times. You know, we've got a conflict going over in Ukraine now, and of course, you know, uh, it ended up being in conflict, but the leaders of the nations was trying to work that out without conflict. So I concluded my paper by trying to pull everything together and show how David had it was his repentant heart that made the difference in his life. He he was the answer to to sin, because he was the connection, the lineage of Jesus. Uh, God uses the weak things in life. He doesn't use perfect people. Thank goodness for that. So I did conclude my paper by adding that. And I just found some really neat journal articles to pull everything together. And I hope you enjoy it if you get to read that. Thank you so much for hearing me out.